ongoing study in the book of Proverbs. We have been in it now for a month. We've covered a number of topics. Our last topic was the use of the tongue, the proper uses and less than desirable uses of the tongue. But today, as we open our study on the idea of a disciplined spirit, the Bible uses different terms for what we might refer to that as. A disciplined spirit might be an example of someone who exhibits self-control or is not easily angered. Those are characteristics of someone that has a disciplined spirit. So the first question this morning I want to get everybody kind of thinking about and kind of engaged with us a bit is, if you were to consider, sometimes we refer to it as our hot buttons, what things test your self-control? When you're right and they're wrong. Okay. That's okay. And they won't admit it. Okay. That's a further extension of that. And there's common themes in that. We stop thinking about what's important. You know, we get engaged and engrossed in something and we put its value above common sense in some cases. But is anger physiological to some degree? It is. You know, it's the excitement of fight or flight. It goes to the animal nature of, instinct of, okay, I'm going to have to defend myself, or I've got to fight this off. Your adrenaline gets pumped up, your heart starts to race, and guess what? Before long, you start to lose control of certain aspects unless you exhibit a huge amount of discipline. Can you think of any biblical examples of where individuals would have been tested to that level and been challenged, probably beyond belief, if we consider it from our standpoint? Job, no doubt. Job would have had no reason to understand why he was being punished or why he was being inflicted with all of these terrible things. And to allow him to be angry over that would have been a logical response. Moses striking the rock. Yes, he lost control. That's an example of him losing control and losing that discipline that he exhibited over and over. And as another example of Moses, what about in the confrontation between Korah, Dathan, and Abiram to his leadership? How do we see Moses handling that? He handled it extremely calmly, putting it in God's hands to deal with it as opposed to trying to deal with it himself. In a logical manner today, if we had a political uprising, what would most leaders choose to do? Exert force. They'd turn around. Certainly in dictatorial nations, they would exhibit that force. That would be their first reaction. In a democratic nation, it might be lashing out on the airwaves to try and sway public opinion, or spinning the story in some way. Yes. Any other examples of individuals that would have had to have exhibited extreme self-control? Jesus. Absolutely. God. How many times did God want to destroy the children of Israel? Over and over, because of their sin and because of their misbehavior, he exhibited as a prime example self-control and a disciplined spirit. Paul. Okay. These are all really good ones. Okay. God, in his discussion with Noah and being fed up with mankind and being ready to destroy it, I want you to take those examples as we go into our study of a disciplined spirit. Be thinking about that, because we're going to see common themes, common principles applied that fit with all of those. And we'll come probably back and discuss some other examples as well. So as we begin our study this morning, a disciplined spirit In Ephesians 4:26, be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger. Give no opportunity to the devil. So the first thing that comes out of that, and a first conclusion is that anger and sin do not necessarily go hand in hand, do they? You can actually be angry and not sin. Jesus was angry when he overturned the money changers' tables in the temple. He was disappointed with what they were doing in the worship and how they had diminished the worship to Jehovah. So we can actually be angry and not sin. And that's a conclusion that we have to, there's righteous anger. If we look at, we are commanded not to let our anger bring us to sin. So that takes discipline and self-control and self-examination. It takes each of us looking at what's my hot button and how far can I be pushed before I react the wrong way. And maybe take a step back and always kind of put a barrier and look at the warning signs. My warning sign is my ears turn red. I've used that example over and over, and it's a tell beyond belief. Our anger is to be short-lived. And this is another thing that's important from this passage. What does it say about our anger? Don't sin, but it says don't let the sun go down on your wrath. So how long can you actually be angry? Less than 12 hours, right? Okay. The Hatfields and the McCoys don't fit that category. So if we find ourselves being angry over the same thing for more than 12 hours, are we abiding by this passage? We're not. That is very telling. We as Christians oftentimes either get our feelings hurt and stay mad about something and don't deal with the situation, and it just lingers. If we put this passage to heart and put a 12 hours limit on being angry about something, we have a couple of options. We have an option to act. One is if we're angry about something and it's involving another brother, we need to talk to that person in that first 12 hours, don't we? Or at least take an initiation to say, we need to talk about this on this date. And then not be angry about it because we've set a peg in the sand that says we're going to go do something about it at this point. It may be too sensitive to talk about that first 12 hours. I recognize that. But we have to take steps, and we can't stay mad about it. We must take steps to resolve. If we take the example literally, we can't be angry for more than 12 hours. One of the other options that we have, as opposed to immediately going to that person, or if we know that there's a person that will not relent, that's angry at us and that has engaged in that, who makes us angry? Ourselves. Well, there are external things that can cause us and initiate it, but nobody can make us angry but ourselves. It is us. It is me that controls my behavior. Somebody can provoke us, but I'm the only one that can let myself get angry. Otherwise, if we let these things linger on, we increase the devil's opportunities. If we stay mad about something, and it's toward a brother, how does that impact everybody else looking at that situation? Negatively. Well, they're not Christ-like. They're not forgiving over something. He's holding a grudge. Does that fit with a disciplined spirit? In some cases, it may be the choice where we have to say, this isn't going to get resolved because the other person doesn't want it resolved. And since I'm the one that controls my anger, what can I do? I can forgive them unilaterally and be done with it and forget about it making me angry. And go on and live my life. And every opportunity I have to talk to that person, I can be positive about it, encourage them. But it doesn't make me angry anymore, does it? Because I've dealt with it. So let's look at our ongoing. There are acts. An uncontrolled temper will cause us to act foolishly. In Proverbs 14 and 17, a man of quick temper acts foolishly, and a man of evil devices is hated. We hear the expression, he flew off the handle. Well, that's, like a hammerhead. If you swing it, it flies off the handle. It's out of control, and it's going to destroy something. Or an axe head that's flown off the handle. It's going to tear something up. Proverbs 14 and 29. Whoever is slow to anger has great understanding, but he who has a hasty temper exalts folly. If you're quick-tempered, what are you probably going to be likely to do? We talked about it last week. Say something you regret. I think we've all been there. Proverbs 29 and 20. Do you see a man who is hasty in his words? There is more hope for a fool than for him. Now this time it didn't equate the fool and the angry man. Because you could have a wise man that got angry and lost his temper, could you not? In a moment of faltering weakness, loss of self-control. Do we ever see any biblical examples of individuals who did that? We used one earlier. Moses did when he struck the rock. Okay? But in this contrast here, it's saying if you do that, you are behaving foolishly. Ecclesiastes 7 and 9. Do not be quick in your spirit to become angry, for anger lodges in the heart of fools. Now this goes to the idea about us talking earlier about how long we can remain angry. If we allow that anger to just linger and linger, it's behaving foolishly. We've heard the term deep-seated resentment. Oftentimes, somebody has a deep-seated resentment towards something. Well, granted, we can have a deep-seated resentment towards sin, but some people have a deep-seated resentment toward an individual who has wronged them in a way. That's anger. And it's something to be put away. Anger can drive us to do things that we would not normally do. Anger drives adrenaline. We talked about this earlier. It's physiological in many ways. Adrenaline increases our heart rates. Anger is often closely related to an animal's fight or flight instinct. And from that standpoint, somebody gets in our face and challenges us, it tends to do that. Most people don't experience that on a day-to-day basis. But there are heated conversations that will occur where someone challenges our integrity, or someone challenges our motives, and we might use the expression, those are fighting words, because we take great pride in those aspects of our character, and when someone assails our character, we become immediately defensive. It takes great discipline and great control. Jeremy makes the points that, this is an example of why there are so many congregations scattered around, is unresolved issues that exist between brothers that, I can take the action to resolve it through discipline and control, or I can just go somewhere else and let it be. Have one church? Well, that's true. And you see that in some communities where there is, because there are no other options, they're forced to go through and resolve problems. Now, unfortunately, problems can still sit in the background. People can choose not to deal with them. And you can see, a family faction or one side of the congregation sitting and another side of the congregation sitting, and the two of them don't ever even work with each other in an end. It takes action. An uncontrolled temper abounds in transgression. Proverbs 29 and 22. A man of wrath stirs up strife, and one given to anger causes much transgression. James 1 and 20. For the anger of a man that does not produce the righteousness of God. Examples. We didn't talk about individuals losing their temper, but there's multiples that we could point to. In Genesis 49 and 6, Simeon and Levi go out and through means of deceit and trickery do what? They avenge the rape of their sister Dinah by killing all the men of the city and the individual responsible for it. Saul and David. Was Saul angry with David? Pretty much so, to the point that he wanted to kill him. Throwing, over and over to the point of tracking him down. How did David show self-control and respect for Saul? Did David ever have a chance to avenge himself of Saul? He felt guilty for cutting off a piece of his robe. When they were in the cave and they took the part of his robe, he felt guilty for that. David could have allowed the people with him, or he himself could have run Saul through with a spear in that instance, and it would have been done. But would David have exhibited the self-control and the righteousness that God praised him for in doing that? No, because Saul was the anointed of God at that time and still the rightful leader in the kingdom. 1 Samuel 25, David and Nabal. Now this one is very relatable for us, okay? Because it goes to the point of an exchange of words and an assault on one's character. What did Nabal call David? Several things. He called him, pretty much just a thief, a scrapling, individual that was really of low repute. What had the people been doing regarding David and Saul? David has killed Saul his thousands and David his 10,000s. The people praised him, but Nabal, on the other hand, assailed his character completely. What was David about to do to Nabal? He was about to go up and just wipe him out completely. What stopped that instance? Nabal's wife, Abigail. Okay, now that's a lesson for us as well as it relates to uncontrolled temper. As it relates to self-discipline. Do we have obligations as third parties, in some cases, to help? Could Abigail have just let things ride, and what would have happened if she hadn't intervened? David would have gone and killed Nabal, probably killed the rest of the family people as well, and taken all of his possessions. But because she intervened and exhibited self-control, David praised and thanked her. Just a sideline as it relates to uncontrolled temper, we can have an influence, a calming force on individuals that are at odds with one another. Perfect example of that. In Esther 1 and 12, Artaxerxes or Ahasuerus and his wife Vashti. What was the situation there? There was a drunken party, was it not? The king calls for his wife to come and exhibit her beauty before all of these drunken people. What'd she say? No. Okay. What did the king, through his uncontrolled temper, end up having to do? Or did he feel he had the obligation to do? He dethroned her. Now, who was more righteous in that behavior? Vashti was. The king, because of his drunkenness and because of his pride, did not realize and recognize how wrong he was. And because of, quote, the nobles surrounding him, he yielded to peer pressure and dismissed the queen. Now, we can think through that a lot. My guess is there was a lot of God's providence in the background of that, because had that not occurred, Esther would not have come to the throne and been queen to be able to help save her people. But it is a good example of an individual losing their self-control, first off, through his drunken behavior, and secondly, through his anger and dismissing his queen. Any other? Well, that was the argument that they used, is that what if all the other women in the kingdom choose to not obey their husband's commands? How will the kingdom fare? And the wise men should have been looking at, why did she refuse it? Was she justified in it? Okay. Uncontrolled temper stirs up strife. In Proverbs 10 and 12, hatred stirs up strife, but love covers all offenses. In Proverbs 15 and 18, a hot-tempered man stirs up strife, but he who is slow to anger quiets contention. I think that fits very well with the situation in Exodus, and when they're talking about Korah, Dathan, and Abiram, and coming up and challenging Moses' authority. He exhibited extreme control, whereas they, because of their behavior, were self-righteous and trying to stir up contention. An uncontrolled temper doesn't speak favorably. An uncontrolled temper looks to find allies. And an uncontrolled temper creates factions. If we feel we're in the wrong and we're mad about something and we're trying to prove our point, there's safety in numbers, aren't there? Oftentimes it's the thought process. So the more people we have on our side, the better off we feel about our position. If I'm trying to sway the opinion of the group, I might try to gain allies in my position. We were having a family gathering yesterday, and the discussion was along the nature of what the definition of passive-aggressive behavior is. And I would guess that this has to fall into that category as well, is that I'm passively out here trying to gain alliances so that I can get my way in the end and sway the opinion. I hadn't really thought about it that way. Melvin? It is. It goes to the idea of the heated conversation that can occur because emotions are running high and people not thinking clearly and trying to get their way out of it. So stir up the crowd, get them on their side, go after the umpire, get him to change his opinion, or belittle him in some way so that you can try and gain influence over them in the future. That's a good example of a modern day application of this. As we look at this from speaking favorably or not speaking favorably, as it relates to stirring up strife in the Lord's body, you know, if there's a topic or an issue and people are on different sides of it, whether it be a doctrinal issue or whether it be a matter of judgment, this is an application of where that can come to a head. As an individual is trying to, well, my judgment's better than this one. I'm going to try and get enough people on my side to sway the opinion. Is that how the behavior within a congregation should be conducted? From a biblical example? No. It's not majority rules. We have a structured leadership because of that, as to how to manage the congregation. We have shepherds that are in place to work with us and guide us. And stirring up strife and gaining allies to be able to sway public opinion only serves to try and fraction and separate things. And that goes to the point that Jeremy made earlier about why so many congregations exist in many cases. It's because people chose to create these alliances and didn't get their way and chose to go do something else. An uncontrolled temper is outrageous. In Proverbs 27:4, wrath is cruel, anger is overwhelming, but who can stand before jealousy? An uncontrolled temper is related to pride. And we've talked about this earlier, because oftentimes as it relates to anger, we're going to bow up and we're going to stand our ground over something that may be a matter of pride as opposed to a matter of principle. I mean, we may be wrong and we don't want to lose face over it. So we stand our ground and try to make it look in some way that we're right, when in reality we're not. Proverbs 21:24. Scoffer is the name of the arrogant, haughty man who acts with arrogant pride. I think we have some political leaders that fit into that category today. No doubt dictators fit with that category, but other leaders, whether democratically elected or whatever, can very well exhibit this type of arrogant pride where they choose not to listen to their advisors. Biblically, we can see where leaders chose not to listen to their advisors. Most notably, which king comes to mind? Rehoboam. And as a result, lost 10 out of the 12 tribes. An uncontrolled temper leaves an individual exposed to the devil. Proverbs 25:28. A man without self-control is like a city broken into and left without walls. That's kind of a graphic description. Of course, our cities today don't have walls, do they? But in their day and time, the strength of a city was determined by how tall its walls were. We remember the children of Israel marching around Jericho. It was a walled city. It was protected in a way that no one could go into it. Jerusalem was considered to be heavily fortified, and as a result, very carefully managed. But a man without self-control is like a city broken into and left without walls. There's just really, it's totally devastating in the case of a city with the walls gone and wiped clean. What cities can we think of that the Bible talks about having been totally destroyed and wiped clean with its walls gone? Jericho? What about the Sidonians? Tyre and Sidon. Nebuchadnezzar came through and wiped it clean, and now it's land for the birds to, seagulls and stuff to land. A man without self-control really is desolate. It may not seem that way on the outside, but in reality, it's totally destroyed. Because their self-control does not give them a basis to work from in a way, or lack of self-control does not give them a basis to work from, to work with others. Thoughts and comments on where we're at in our discussion on uncontrolled temper? I don't think we have any restriction on presenting the truth and presenting the truth of a matter in a self-disciplined way. Certainly, even if it's going to when the truth comes out and it reveals that someone else has been deceiving others, it's going to be pretty hard. There's going to be some anger associated with that. But to defend one's own honor, so to speak, but to defend it in a way that is righteous, not prideful, not righteously done, unrighteously done. We see individuals that certainly were wronged in many ways, but ultimately rose through that. Joseph no doubt did. How he treated his brothers. And I have no doubt that it eventually came to Jacob's attention that his sons had done all of these things to his son Joseph. But I don't think Joseph did it in a way to diminish his brothers. Certainly he had every right to, but he dealt with it in an honorable way. I'm trying to think of another example that would fit with that. Yes.
Then answer the question in those terms, and it's not about defending me, it's not about defending my honor or whatever. It's about doing what's best for him and me, and that's the overriding goal. And that really colors how you deal with that.
Absolutely. That Tim put it very well from that standpoint. And if anybody didn't hear that, it's that you're going after the common motive of that both individuals have souls, and that you're trying to resolve that matter. And if it happens to defend your honor and you come out right out of it, well, that's one thing, but that's not the purpose of why you're trying to do it. Proverbs 25 and 28, a man without self-control is like a city broken down and left without walls. We've made that point. An uncontrolled temper is a work of the flesh. In Ephesians 4 and 31, let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and slander be put away from you along with malice. And the whole point of that list is those individuals that exhibit those behaviors will not receive their reward in heaven. An uncontrolled temper disqualifies a man from being an elder. In Titus 1 and 7, for an overseer as God's steward must be above reproach. He must not be arrogant or quick-tempered or a drunkard or a violent or greedy of gain. Now, it makes the point there, can an elder be angry? I think just like we've already made the point that anger in and of itself is not sinful. But he makes this as a qualifier here. What does it say? Quick-tempered. Loss of self-control. And that would be what would be disqualifying. I think I bumped my... In 1 Timothy 3 and 3, not a drunkard, not violent, not gentle, not quarrelsome, not a lover of money. Proverbs... results of an uncontrolled temper. In Proverbs 9 and 7 through 8, whoever corrects a scoffer gets himself abuse, but he who reproves a wicked man incurs injury. Do not reprove a scoffer, or he will hate you. Reprove a wise man, and he will love you. Proverbs 22, 24, and 23. Make no friendship with a man given to anger, nor go with a wrathful man, lest you learn his ways and entangle yourself in a snare. Evil communications corrupt good morals. We are taught to watch our companions and who we associate with. If we associate with somebody that's quick-tempered, are we going to learn as an example to be quick-tempered in and of ourselves? Possibly, if we don't exhibit self-discipline. It certainly gets easier when you see it exhibited that way over and over. If you're a child in a family that exercises profanity, does the child tend to pick up profanity? Yes. Those are the kinds of examples that we're trying to discuss. The results of an uncontrolled temper will have an influence on others. He makes a point here about making no friendship with one given to anger. The influences there will be negative, but also what can you get drug into if you're associated with someone that's quick-tempered? Let's say I'm a young man and I'm out with my friend and he's got a hot temper and we're at a party or a gathering and he loses control. What's likely to happen? I may get drug into that battle too. Certainly if I'm in the wrong location. How controlled anger acts. Anger by itself is not sinful. In Mark 3 and 5, he looked around them at the anger and grieved at their hardness of heart and said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." He stretched it out. His hand was restored. Jesus was angry at the Pharisees and different ones that were condemning him because he was going to heal someone. Numbers 11 and 1, we talked about people complained in the hearing of the Lord about their misfortunes. They didn't have the food, they didn't have the things that they wanted, and he actually struck them with a plague because of their complaints. He could have destroyed them completely. Controlled anger exhibits and shows understanding. Proverbs 14 and 29, whoever is slow to anger has great understanding, but he who has a hasty temper exhibits folly. Anger by itself still is not sinful. It appeases strife. In Proverbs 15 and 18, a hot-tempered man stirs up strife, but he who is slow to anger quiets contention. And as we close, prevents further problems. In Proverbs 25 and 8, do not hastily bring into court, for what will you do in the end when your neighbor puts you to shame? Don't run in foolishly into a matter because you're mad about something. Value of a controlled temper. Whoever is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he who rules his spirit than he who takes the city. There is great value placed on self-discipline. People that happen to see an individual exhibit self-control typically will respond to them afterwards favorably. Come up to them and say, I really appreciate how you handled that. 1 Samuel 18 and 7, and the woman sang to one another as they celebrated, Saul has struck down his thousands and David his 10,000s. And we made allusion to that earlier, but I want to make a point off of this particular passage. Even though David was, at this point, already anointed to become the succeeding king, and Saul was now chasing him to kill him, he exhibited that very self-control that Lindsay made the point about. He felt guilty about cutting a part of his garment off. And as a result of that, the value of the controlled temper is we see that David was a man after God's own heart. He continued to live righteously, even though he would have been no doubt angered over these injustices. David had been mistreated by Saul in many ways, one of which is very personal, and that'll be the conclusion that I want to end about. What happened to David's first wife? She was stripped away from him and given to someone else by Saul. And if you don't think it gets any more personal from an anger standpoint, David had every right to be angry at Saul. Think about that as we conclude. Self-control and self-discipline is exhibited throughout the Bible by individuals tested deeper than anybody that in any way that we can imagine. We can exhibit it, we can learn it, we can do it ourselves. Thank you.